In a complex, ever-changing environment, Deloitte Forensic is there to bring clear and focused attention to the problems our clients face every day. Smart businesses assess, respond to, and monitor the risks of fraud, corruption, regulatory compliance, and financial crime proactively to manage the costs and impacts of adverse events. Monitoring data and behavior and anticipating negative outcomes allows clients to strategically achieve their compliance and financial
On the 23rd of April, 1845, William Welch Deloitte made the first entry into his time ledger. With a stroke of a pen, he set off a series of connections that has grown into a global organisation of over 330,000 of us. Today, more than 175 years later, we've chosen our Founders' Day as a day to consider what has made us, what continues to make us, thrive. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on our enduring values together and look around at who we are, at what we aspire to be, as we take this moment to say thank you.
谢谢.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Deloitte.
For all that you've done this year, for our past, present, and future.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are pleased to welcome you to the 10th edition of the Deloitte Forensic Colloquium. We're delighted and honored to have you all here. As always, we promise to make this session a worthwhile session. And having said that, it is important for us at Deloitte to highlight that we very much appreciate your attendance and participation for the colloquium. Talking about participation, permits me to take us through the housekeeping rules for the colloquium. To start with, we encourage your active participation. Where possible, try to turn down the notification sound of your digital devices to avoid distractions. And please feel free to ask questions using and share your insight also using the Q&A button. And you rest assured that we have a Q&A session planned to address most of your queries. Finally, the session will be recorded for educational purposes and for reference purposes. By participating, you consent to being recorded. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me as I welcome one of our finest and most esteemed leaders within the Deloitte forensic practice in West Africa. With all pleasure, join me as I welcome Chazo Okadibo to give us the welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, and welcome once again, everyone, to the landmark 10th edition of the Deloitte Forensic Colloquium. Reflecting on our journey, I'm filled with immense pride at what we've achieved. This event, curated by the Deloitte forensic team in West Africa, serves as a catalyst for impactful change. It continues to be a platform which encourages conversation amongst diverse stakeholders, enriching our interactions and providing invaluable insights. We're confident that this year's colloquium will uphold and elevate the high standards of excellence and innovation we have cultivated over the years. Starting from the first session of our colloquium, we've explored a wide range of compelling and thought-provoking topics. Our inaugural edition examined strengthening business integrity and ethics through collaboration, highlighting the importance of thorough vendor due diligence and the advantages of proactive risk management. In the second edition, we explored the fraud crystal ball, predictive management of fraud risk, emphasizing the transformative role of data analytics in predicting and detecting fraud within supply chains. By our fifth edition, our discussions evolved to include e-discovery and digital investigations, organization, governance, and cloud. Here, we highlighted the use of AI for Know Your Customer KYC processes and the application of natural language processing for intelligent name screening to minimize false positives and optimize alerts management. And now, as we convene for the 10th edition, we turn our focus to the investigation maze, navigating the right balance within the corporate environment. I have no doubt in my mind that today's event will be an invaluable forum for exploring this crucial aspect of business operations, enriched by diverse experiences from within and outside Africa. Therefore, it's with great pleasure that I introduce our distinguished keynote speaker for the 10th Deloitte Forensic Colloquium, William Jackson III, who is currently the head of the Africa Business Integrity Department at Shell. With over 2 decades of experience, William has established himself as a remarkable leader and investigator. He excels in managing diverse cross-functional teams of investigators and third-party contractors, consistently achieving exceptional outcomes. William's expertise is wide-ranging, encompassing criminal and corporate investigations, governance in trading and supply investigations, as well as risk management. He's proven adept at identifying contributory factors and recommending robust controls to proactively mitigate risk and exposure. His extensive experience spans across regions, including Africa and the Americas, making him a truly global expert in his field. You're very welcome, William. It's lovely to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. And first of all, my sincere appreciations to the Deloitte team for the invitation to speak before you. I've attended these sessions and I really have grown immensely in terms of just the learning and the sharing of information. So I'm truly honored to be able to speak before you. I'm going to bring my presentation up, and if someone could just let me know that you're able to see it, then I'll go ahead and proceed. Thank you. Can someone acknowledge that you can see the presentation? Okay.
We can see your presentation.
Awesome, awesome. Investigating the investigation maze, navigating the right balance within the corporate environment. When this title was first sent to me, I was trying to think, how do you structure this? How do you structure to really talk about navigating the right balance within a corporate environment, given that every industry is different. So hopefully, I want you all to take this journey with me, and I think you will enjoy the thoughts that I put together, but more importantly, provokingly looking at how do we actually navigate. I've broken this out into three real good buckets. One is the introduction to investigation. Why do we do it? What is the purpose of a good investigation? What are the risks behind a good investigation? We're going to look at a few occupational frauds and trends. And I think when you look at some of the numbers, it's a little surprising where we don't see investigations coming from and where we should. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about the challenges to internal investigation and some proposed solution. Now, let me be clear, this is not about Shell. This is about the industry in general. So a lot of the things that I will talk about will be about what we see across the board, not necessarily what we see within Shell. So what is the purpose of a good investigation, and why do we do investigation? I think it's very imperative that we start with the baseline. And I think as we continue any journey, it is important that we understand the base. One, we like to mitigate risks and the legal risks. For companies such as Shell and many others, you're traded on the New York Stock Exchange or you're traded on in UK. So you always have to think about Foreign Corruption Practice Act, UK Bribery Act. Within Nigeria, there are also legislations that you need to follow. So mitigating the risks and being able to show those regulatory bodies that you can conduct a thorough investigation and report out is one. Protecting the company's reputation. It is important that how we investigate misconduct, fraud, all of this helps to build, one, our brand, and number two, it helps to build stakeholders' trust. And without the stakeholders, we know what would happen. Immediately go in, start selling shares, the value of the company start going down. So the purpose of that investigation is to maintain, one, the brand. Number two, also maintain stakeholders' trust. Ensuring the compliance. The investigation team, it is apparently that we ensure that the rules of the company are being provided. We ensure that gaps in the control framework of the compliance program are strong and addressed. It is part of that investigation team that helps to drive those functions. And lastly, maintaining a safe work environment. We want all our employees to come to work. We want them to be able to speak up. We want them to be able to tell us what's going on, because there's no way as an investigative team, we're going to know everything. Now, with understanding the internal investigations, we also need to understand there are risks with internal investigation. One, if you don't do the investigation properly, now you erosion of trust with those regulatory bodies. A good example in how Shell mitigated this risk, for those who can go back a few years, that was the Palapino case. It's a public case. And Shell was unaware that a company was paying money to get some products into the company. We didn't know. But the DOJ says you should have known. We were able to convince the DOJ that the Business Integrity Department can do a very thorough investigation and report out. And we did. It took us a good year to go through it, but we were able to report that out. We were able to convince the DOJ, we identified the risk, here are the controls that we're going to put in place. And they said, thank you very much. They gave us a nice fine and about 10 years of probation. So we still got punished in the end, but again, it wasn't expected that we wouldn't. But what we eliminated was the DOJ bringing someone in to do the investigation on our behalf. So again, the risk, if you don't do it right, legal exposure, reputational damage, loss of employee value proposition. Do you want to work for a company that is in the papers because you violated regulations or you violated the law? It damaged shareholders' trust. They go and reduce their shares in your company. Good example, Volkswagen. Volkswagen had the emission issues in the US. Volkswagen took a big hit, not only in their branding, but also in their value. And employees, you can tell the employees felt compelled do I want to work for this company? Other brands that was not included, but felt the impact of this was Audi, also Porsche. All of these felt because the company's reputation was hit. Non-compliance, lack of employees' trust in the program because they don't believe that if I report to you, you're going to investigate properly, you're going to investigate thoroughly, you're going to investigate independently. And it also eliminates the speak up culture. Again, there's no way investigations can work without the speak up culture. And lastly, the erosion of the concept of a safe workplace. And it's also, do you really want to work for that company? So what are some of the strategic advantages of an effective corporate investigation? Discovery and prevention of fraudulent activities. That's what we're looking for. We investigate, we uncover instances of fraud, we uncover instances of embezzlement, financial fraud, and other forms of misuse. Protection of company assets, protecting the company. Those are some of the strategic advantages of an effective corporation. And most importantly, a properly conducted and corporate investigation is essential for maintaining organizational integrity, protection, financial stability, and ensuring legal compliance. And we're going to come back a little bit more to the integrity, especially as we look at what are some of the risks in conducting those investigations. I mentioned at the beginning some occupational fraud, and when I looked at these numbers, and these are from ACFE, from a 2024 report, but what was amazing to me is when I look at internal auditing and the lack of cases coming from internal auditing, based on this, a little less than 2. I think about information technology, less than 4. I see those as big risks. And the risks that I see, and let's use information technology for one, is that there's information going out of our company, whether you're providing a USB drive and you take that out, or people emailing it to Gmail, there's information going out. How is that risk being managed within the company? How do you, as the investigator, navigate through to manage that risk? We get involved here in Nigeria to look at and have a risk department that runs analysis that look at if 30 gigabytes go out to a Gmail account, I want to know. If Yahoo is being assessed so many times, I want to know. This is the navigation as you get into what is the risk within your organization and how do you help to mitigate some of that risk. The next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about internal auditing. There should be a very good, unique relationship between internal auditing and investigations. Internal auditors, and I know some companies, the internal auditor and investigator are the same individual, or they're in the same team. Within Shell, internal auditing and investigation is one large group, but our job functions are totally different. Internal auditors are looking for assurances. How do we ensure that the controls are working? An investigator is looking from a different set of lenses. I see the payment went out, but let's go a couple levels lower that's beyond assurance to start picking up. So what we do here in Nigeria is that for every audit that is going on in Nigeria, I have an investigator either on the audit or attached to the audit. Why? Because I want to see what the audit findings are. I want to read that audit report. I want to identify potential risk and how do we navigate through that risk. It's a proactive approach to a reactive situation. The audit itself is reactive, but identifying particular risks is from a proactive perspective. So what are some of the challenges as we look at the process of an effective corporate investigation? What are the triggers? Well, of course, the triggers are allegations. And we want those allegations to come through, whether they come through from employees, shareholders, wherever they come through. I will tell you here within Shell, we have a global helpline. The helpline sits in the United States, and people are allowed to make a phone call. We have a local phone number in every country. Make a phone call or use an email to go through. That was an effective way that worked. When I came to Nigeria, as we look at those triggers, what I identified was the BID team here was was locked into a room and nobody knew about them. No one engaged with them. Everyone was afraid of them, so no one talked to them. So we went through a paradigm shift to get more public, and coming from the United States and coming from law enforcement, we used what's called a community policing concept. And I started putting my investigators as part of different businesses. And they became that focal point. And if you wanted to bounce an idea out, you have a person that you can immediately contact. And then we started seeing those triggers start coming up. But more importantly, it's about getting the information that's coming in. It's about identifying the right investigative strategy, defining that scope, assembling the team, very important, right skill set. What do you do when you don't have the right skill set or you don't have an investigation team? That's where organizations like Deloitte come in that have those skill sets to mitigate and help you through those investigations. Understanding the legal standards, and what are those standards? What are the local requirements in Nigeria? What is the UK Bribery Act? How do all of that interact in your investigative strategy? The execution, the proper tools. Does everyone have a forensic team? No. So how do you mitigate that? Do you not investigate? Do you not use those analysis to come through and help you get to the right results? No, if you don't, you reach out to teams like Deloitte who come in and will help you with those pieces of the business to bring it through. Documentation, key element, the post is the stakeholder engagement. And we're going to talk a little bit more about stakeholder engagement and how they impact investigation. So what are some of the challenges that we face as we go through this navigation? Balancing speed with thoroughness. All of us that are in the investigative field get an allegation, especially if it's something very serious. And what do we hear? We need this finished in 2 weeks. I can tell you because Deloitte has done some work for me, and the timeline they give me and the timeline I want, we never match. We never match, but we find a balance in the middle of it. But it's speed versus thoroughness. What's important? For me, thoroughness is more important than the speed. Yes, I would like to get it done in 30 days. Our traditional average is to try to do an investigation within 60 to 90 days. But there are some, due to complexity, that's going to take longer. I can work on the speed and forget the thoroughness, but am I, if we go back to the slide on what are the purposes of an investigation, am I meeting those 4 buckets by working on speed? So we focus on thoroughness. Managing employee morale. This is a very hard one as you're navigating because you have that opportunity to investigate an individual. So how do you manage that employee over a period of time? Well, a couple things people do is as soon as they get the investigation, they send an email to William, we're going to schedule a meeting with you. And that's all we say. So the employee is wondering, what is this about? I know it's from BID. I know what they do. What have I done? Is that a good way to manage employees? The way we manage this is we wait. We do all the fact finding. We don't reach out to the employee until we're actually ready to hold that interview. So if I send you an email today, I'm ready to interview you tomorrow. So that window is very small in terms of managing employees' morale. Look at the legal complexities. On ABC matters, do you need to bring in an ABC expert to understand, do you really have anti-bribery and corruption? If you're a company like Shell, do you need to report out to the DOJ? Do you need to call the UK? Understanding legal complexities and how do you mitigate those? Ineffective collaboration across teams. What you find in a lot of organizations is that IT wants to work in one bucket, finance in another bucket, HR in another bucket. How do we mitigate that? I got my team accessibility to some of those key systems and got them training. So if they want to know about SAP, they log into SAP. If you want to know about IT, I have a forensic analyst that can log in. I brought that wealth of knowledge internally that allow us to mix in. Unstructured or complex data. Well, there's a lot, and again, some industries are using AI, Some industries are not. AI, while it's fairly new and can analyze a large amount of data in a very short time. There's also from Shell side, and I'm going to be very clear, this is strictly Shell. There's also some data privacy concerns that we have to work through as to how well we can use some of those AI tools. And of course, the issue of privacy. How does investigators maintain their level of privacy in conducting those investigations? Key important when privacy also comes into stakeholder engagement. In Shell, and again, I'm not saying Shell is the model for everyone, but within Shell, the BID team has a level of independence. I report to no one in Nigeria. I have no accountability to no individual or leader in Nigeria. I report into corporate, which we report into the audit committee of Shell PLC. So when you think about stakeholders engagement, I do have EVPs and VPs that are my stakeholders on certain investigations. But because I don't report to them, it allows me to maintain that independence. In a lot of organizations, the head of legal also oversees investigation, and you're also doing cases within legal. Clearly that's a conflict. And clearly you have to ask yourself, how do I maintain a level of independence? And those are the structures that you need to do a step out and convince the leaders, maybe it's best that we bring someone in to do that investigation. Some stakeholders that I listen to also like to direct investigation. You can't. There's no way you can be impartial if you allow stakeholders to direct how you investigate, who you speak to, what should be in a report, what should not be in a report. It takes away from your lack of independence. And as you're navigating through this, you have to determine how do you maintain this? How do you maintain this lack of independence? Think about if your next role that you're looking for requires you to investigate the person that may interview you for your next role. How do you remain objective? How do you remain independent? And if that is your sole motivation to get to that next role and you're willing to compromise that investigation, then this is not the role. This is not the area for you. There's an old cliche in America that I grew up with, and we said this a lot in law enforcement, and especially when I was the captain managing teams. There's two things that you have. One is your integrity, and the second one, a little bit more smaller, is your credit report. So you have to think about as you're navigating through my independence versus my next role. Which one am I going to do? And if you're going to be in the role of investigation, your integrity must stay forefront. Because if it doesn't, you lose everybody. No one will trust you. No one will come to you. We now get people to slide notes under our door. We actually get people that just walk in. They're not afraid to be seen coming in. And it's because over the last 5 years, we will maintain your confidentiality. We will maintain integrity. We will conduct a very fair and thorough investigation. And that's what our staff and that's what our stakeholders really want, even though they may attempt to try to change the direction of the investigation. Leveraging technical tools. Data analytics is very, very big within our investigations, and I think is very important. E-discovery, some use relativity, some use Zilab. They're all the same tools. It's just what works best for you and your system. Digital forensics, definitely looking at mobile phones. WhatsApp is very big in the industries today. So how do you leverage through getting through the WhatsApp and the other conversations that are taking place that are very important? If you're looking at a bribery and a corruption, the conversation may be more so on the mobile device than what you will find on a computer. Cloud forensic, artificial intelligence. These are all of the tools as we look at navigating within that corporate environment that we have to bring in. we are the SMEs for our organization. So we need to be knowledgeable of these products. We need to bring those products in. We need to seek the right funding. And if we can't get the right funding, then we need to establish those relationships with companies such as Deloitte to bring that in so that we can be very thorough in what we do. So let me kind of bring this journey to a closure. And again, talked about a lot of things. And I think what's important when you're navigating in a corporate environment is one, you need the right capacity and skill sets in order to conduct an investigation. Within Shell, majority of the people, and I'm very cautious how I word this to be politically correct, the majority of the people that we hire in BID are experienced hires. We are not set up to take a novice and train them to be an investigator. We only hire experience because we're looking at capacity. My staff in Nigeria is a combination of attorneys, there's a combination of financial background, and then you have people with me who come through the law enforcement cycle that give you that granular level of investigations. So again, if you don't have the right capacity, look at Deloitte and look at some of the other firms that can allow you and support you through your journey. Leveraging technology, there's no way we can do investigations without technology. We need to understand the systems within the corporate environment. How do we maneuver through those systems? How do we extract what we need? How do we process that data to get the information that we need in order to conduct the best investigation that we can? Keeping abreast of broad trends. When we look at the ACFE numbers, and like I said, it was very surprising to me to see only less than 2 cases in internal auditing, because I know here I've gotten a lot more cases just from the internal auditing, but it's about having that connectivity in. Also, when we look at navigating through that corporate environment, it's about getting a seat as an investigator or as the head of the team, getting a seat at the table. I actually sit at the table when decisions are being made about a major tender exercise or a new business opportunity. And my role in doing that is identifying that risk that could occur before it occurs so that we can plan for that risk. It is important as you work through your organization that you build a skill set and the relationship with your stakeholders and those senior leaders so that you can bring it home, so that you can be more than, oh, that's just an investigation team. Now you're on the proactive side. Now you're sitting at the table, helping them to understand what those risk models are and how you can help mitigate those risks. That's what we bring. And as you move through that corporate environment, it's important that you understand the different business units and how do you become a part of that unit, understanding their business, being a part of their business, giving advice to their business, attending those meetings, sitting there and just giving people that opportunity to talk to you about what's going on. Because if you really want to know what's going on and how you're going to maneuver through that, you're going to have to talk to people. Lastly, investigators, please maintain your skill set. It's imperative that you understand where the company is going. It's imperative that you understand the skill sets that are out there. How do you take the training? How do you go to your organizations and bring about the expense of why this training is necessary? Organizations do a lot of training. ACFE does training, a lot of online. It is imperative. So when we think about creating the right balance, it's not a single approach. It's a multi-approach. And that approach is, number one, why are we investigating? Number two, understanding the risks of investigating. Number three, understanding the risks if you don't do it. Number four, maintaining integrity. Number five, doing a thorough investigation. Number six, identifying the right resources that you need. And number seven, if you don't have them, how to contract and get them. And number eight, please maintain your skill set, maintain stakeholder capability. Those are some of the suggestions that we do. I do know if we were sitting around the table, there'll be a lot more that we could do. With that, thank you so much. I'm really appreciative that I was given this opportunity. and hopefully someone can take one or two things away and help them as they move through the corporate environment.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, William. That was profound and deep. Thank you. Well done. I recall when we started the first edition of the Deloitte Forensic Colloquium, it was you and the visionary of this colloquium, Biola Adeoye. And, hearing you talk about these things, it's quite exciting. And I must say thank you for some of the insights. It's like a refresher for some people like us that investigation is our bread and butter. At this point, please, participants, our esteemed audience, please, if you have any question for William, I understand a couple of questions have come up. In the course of the session, William is still very much with us. We would ask the team will collate these questions. So we need to move very quickly because we have a set time within which we undertake the forensic colloquium. Once again, I'd like to thank you, William. And we also like to thank our audience. I think I've seen some responses, some reactions. Well done. So at this point in time, I'd like to beckon on my colleague, Naomi, because we'll be going right into the panel discussion. And we have gathered the finest of the finest. So Naomi, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Babajide. It is indeed a pleasure for me to introduce these distinguished panelists to our amazing participants. We have chosen our panelists from across the globe with great care due to the sensitive nature of today's topic. Our first panelist is Professor Antonio Poe. Antonio currently leads the Deloitte Africa forensic practice. He leads a team of over 130 specialists across a broad range of forensic domains. He has over 18 years of forensic experience covering fraud risk management, forensic investigation, and forensic technology. He holds several industry certifications, as you can see, one of which is a certified fraud examiner. He also holds a PhD in information systems, where he specializes in digital forensics. Our second panelist is Santia Oka. Santia is a director in Deloitte Francophone Africa. He's responsible for the forensic practice across Francophone countries in Africa. He has garnered over 13 years of audit and consulting experience. He is also a certified fraud examiner and an active member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Our third panelist is Stacey Toda Feldman. Stacey is an international lawyer. She leads the Deloitte UK forensic practice for the energy, resources, and industrials across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. She is also the UK mining and metal sector lead. With over 20 years of experience advising clients, Stacey provides a range of advisory and reactive services to clients from a wide range of industries. Our fourth panelist is Ehoe Ame Oge, who is the HR leader for Deloitte West Africa. She is responsible for providing HR strategy and cultural transformation. She is also an experienced HR leader with a passion for talent development and organizational performance. Finally, our last panelist is Abayomi Aino. Abayomi is a senior manager within the Deloitte West Africa forensic practice. Abayomi has a wealth of experience in providing forensic, internal audits, and compliance review services. He is a specialist leading projects on AML, that is anti-money laundering, anti-bribery and corruption, fraud investigations, conflict of interest, and integrity due diligence. At this point, I will hand over to Babajide Okunlola, who is one of our associate directors in the Deloitte West Africa forensic practice and the moderator of today's panel discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. You're far too kind. That's very interesting, very inspiring profiles from our panelists of today. And we are pleased. Attendees, please do not forget, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box to ensure we endeavor to cover as much as is practicable. We have a number of questions for our panelists of today, and I'll tell you, sitting here and being able to engage these panelists, it's indeed it's a privilege. Antonio, I'll be starting with you. And for us, one key point that comes, leading the Africa forensic practice and your experience with the versatility that you have. What are some of the key considerations that when conducting corporate investigations that one must take note of? And then how do you prioritize areas of focus when commencing a case as an investigator?
Thanks, Babajide. It's good to be on the receiving end where you're putting me on the spot, but I'll get you back. It's good to be with everyone, and thanks for everyone for joining. Look, I think the key considerations, Babajide, without touching on, or rather, regurgitating much of what William has said, for me, I suppose there are 3 or 4, right? It begins with a trigger. The emphasis on a trigger, and this is something that William spoke about. Many of us are familiar with the ACFE, and you'll know that they stress the importance of making sure that you base your investigation on a predication. So those days of fishing expeditions, we have no place for that in society today. They're unethical and they shouldn't be entertained. Something that William touched on, which I believe quite strongly, is that when you conduct these investigations without that reasonable suspicion that something untoward has taken place, or predication as the ACFE calls it, is that you lose that trust of your employees and stakeholders in general. So that's the first one, is that let's focus on making sure that what we take on as part of our investigation is based on something. The second one, really, if you follow the journey, is that, yes, we're going to look at our evidence and we're going to analyze it. The reality of what we're seeing today is that these crimes are they're evolving and they're getting more complex. So the problem is multifaceted. We can no longer approach this from a resourcing point of view, call it the old school way, right? Where we bring in or we rely on our gumshoe experts. And yes, there's place for them, but we now have to bring in legal technology engineers, chartered accountants. We have to bring in different experts so that we get to the bottom of the issue and we deal with the complexity that we see in investigations. As we progress with the journey of a typical investigation, we get to reporting and recommendation. And this is my last point, is that we really need to make sure that we don't stop at a report. And it's easy to just fall for, hey, my job is done. I've put my findings in a report. There you go. It's really around bringing focus to measurable impact beyond that report. So we do our follow-ups and many other activities, and we may need to support law enforcement or other HR and other divisions. But we as a forensic practitioners, as it were, need to realize that our job doesn't end at a report. So those are at a high level, the key areas of focus when looking at commercial investigations.
Thank you, Antonio. So very good point. We cannot go as investigators into fishing expedition. And our work does not stop at reporting. There has to be measurable impact. Now, over to you, Stacey. Looking at the multi-jurisdictional experience that you have, how then can an investigator approach a case to ensure that there's thoroughness and also being mindful of efficiency? So it's not just being thorough, but you need to be efficient and being able to manage your stakeholders. How then do you think an investigator can do this?
Thanks, Babajide, and to the team for inviting me to support this fantastic event today. That's a great question, because things can quite quickly spiral out of control or be inefficient, especially when you're conducting a multi-jurisdictional investigation. So one of the most effective ways to ensure that thoroughness and efficiency is to establish clear objectives and scope of the investigation at the outset. And I know that sounds really basic and simple, but oftentimes it's these very initial steps that are overlooked or taken for granted, right? So ensure to reflect what exactly are the issues here that we need to address? What am I looking to achieve? What are the potential impacts this could have on the organization? And what do I need to do to substantiate the allegation? Because thinking through this lens from the very outset will allow you to put appropriate structure around your approach and ascertain how to maybe prioritize allegations from different geographies. And I'd say even before you proceed further, it's also worth taking a quick pause at the outset to consider with an independent lens whether this actually warrants an investigation to begin with. And if so, what are the most crucial points for you to consider in order to substantiate the allegation? Because oftentimes where I see inefficiencies is lack of a robust triage stage. So, allegations coming through to corporate investigators, are they actually in the right place to begin with? Or is there potentially a different route in the organization better suited for handling those matters, such as HR, for example? Because if an investigator does take a matter that's not the right home for it in the company, that could be a very inefficient use of the investigator's time. So once you've established this, does it really need to be investigated? And are you clear on your objectives and scope? That enables you to develop your investigation plan. And, as William's very first remark noted, he said when he was asked to be a keynote speaker, his first thought was, how do I structure this? And that's exactly what we should be thinking when we're at the outset of investigation to help achieve that thoroughness and efficiency. But I'd also say, remember that an investigation plan is a living, breathing document. And, as you all know, investigations take twists and turns as you uncover more evidence and as you triangulate information throughout. So keep an open mind and revisit that investigation plan as needed so you ensure relevancy throughout the investigation and maintain that clear path. Some other ways to be sure to preserve efficiency is capture and preserve that evidence immediately, right? Capturing evidence in that raw original format as quickly as possible to help avoid any evidence tampering or potential destruction of evidence. And where prudent, used advanced forensic tools to analyze and sift through kind of large volumes of digital evidence quickly and usually more accurately. Right, often when we're handling investigations that have large amounts of data, such as extensive email reviews, it can be overwhelming and time intensive to conduct this in a more old-fashioned way by hand or by manual review. So, using the right automated tools and forensic technology will drive time and cost efficiencies, as well as it will, allow you to narrow in on the more relevant information as quickly as possible. And on that note, it's worth saying, focus on collecting only what is necessary, because again, this is an area that can quickly cause an investigation to spiral out of control and become inefficient. As an investigator and a problem solver, and all of us, we want to follow every crumb and identify the what, the where, the how, the when to the nth degree. But despite that natural curiosity, we should always consider proportionality when sifting through and collecting evidence so that things don't potentially spiral out of control. One or two more points really quickly, if I may. I think it's really important to conduct comprehensive interviews because oftentimes you only get one shot to extract that key information during an interview. You don't always have the luxury of going back multiple times to clarify additional points. So, plan ahead and think of that interview like a game of chess and try and anticipate where the conversation may go so that you can maximize, your time during that session, as poorly structured interviews could lead to significant inefficiencies. And perhaps my last point is the importance of clear and timely communications, both with your team and key stakeholders. Oftentimes where I see inefficiencies in an investigation is when the investigation team itself is not clear on their own instructions, including the who's doing what, and who they need to touch base with as key stakeholders throughout the investigation. So again, having that mapped out can really drive efficiencies. Thank you.
Excellent points, Stacey. Thank you. You've rehashed a number of points, and it's very instrumental to note that as investigators, our investigation plan is a live and breathing document. because when investigations go on, there could be points that or matters that become fundamental for us to take note of. Wow. And the use of technology and focusing on only what is necessary. Well, I think focusing on what is necessary will take me to Santia. What are the critical factors to consider when defining the scope of an investigation, Santia?
Hi, Babajide. Thank you for the question. I don't know why you are asking me such a difficult question, knowing that my English is not good. Okay. No. I think that the critical factors for defining the scope of the investigation come from the quality of the allegation. That is the first thing. The quality of the allegation will help us determine the objective and the purpose of the investigation. So I often tell my client that an allegation saying that they are stealing your money somewhere is not an allegation. We cannot have a clear and good investigation based on this kind of allegation. So when you put in place a whistleblowing policy and whistleblowing system and speak up process, you have to teach your employee on how to make to fill the whistleblowing issue. So basically, the quality of the allegation will help us define the objective and the purpose of the investigation. And after that, as soon as we have a detailed allegation and you clearly understand the case, it will allow you to identify the stakeholders, the key stakeholders. So for the key stakeholder, you have those who are involved in the case and those who are around the case on which you can leverage to collect data, understand the process and so on before going to discuss with those who are involved in the case. The third thing that you can consider and you should consider is the legal complexity, the legal environment of the case being investigated. So basically, you should consider the legal environment, which can include data privacy issues and so on. And after all that, you can define and you should define a clear time frame for the investigation, because usually investigation come after an urgent case and a clear issue to be addressed to save the company asset and so on. So you should define a clear time frame for the investigation. I think just to summarize what I was saying, so it was the quality of the allegation that will help us determine a clear objective and the purpose of the investigation. And we should also consider the legal complexity, identify the clear stakeholders that will be involved in the investigations, and then determine a clear time frame for the investigation. Over to you.
Thank you, Santia. Santia, I have no doubt that you are a bilingual colleague, so there is no problem. Thank you for that. The quality of the allegations, as well as the legal implication, looking into matters around data privacy. Thank you. You see, when you talk about the legal implications, then I look to someone like Ahoy, as an HR leader, and knowing having worked in different industries, including consulting that you are now, and which is where you will be, right? Right? How can investigations be conducted in a way that can reinforce a positive corporate culture? And I think this question is also similar to one that has been passed to me about creating a culture where employees feel comfortable. So in your own view, as an HR specialist, as an HR leader that you're currently, how can investigations be conducted to reinforce a positive corporate culture?
Thank you so much, Babajide, for that question. And thank you, team, for putting this together. Okay, for us to ensure that we still have the positive culture while investigating, first and foremost, we must establish clear policies and procedures. Now, when we have these policies, what it does is it must align with the company's values and culture. And we communicate these policies clearly to all employees. so they understand. And what that does is also build their trust. Then while conducting these investigations, we must at all times maintain transparency. What does that mean? It has to be an open investigation while respecting confidentiality. So therefore, where there's a need to give the information you give, but be very careful about the confidential part. Then we must ensure fairness, because again, the culture must be preserved, and fairness is the key. So while we're doing this, we're investigating, we must be impartial, we must avoid bias or favoritism. Very important. So that means we must train our investigators on cultural and legal compliance, because it's very key. Then confidentiality cannot be taken out of it, because once there's an issue with confidentiality, it affects the culture. So we must ensure we have that in place, and we uphold a non-retaliatory policy. So therefore, the people that have come out to say this was happening, the misconduct, they are not scared. So that next time they can come. And therefore, people in the organization understand that you cannot retaliate because this person has said so. Another thing that must happen is we must promptly start the investigation. We cannot waste time, because it's very key we address those issues very quickly to demonstrate that the organization takes these concerns very seriously, very key. Then at the end of every investigation or every thing that's been done, there must be learning, there must be process improvement. Now, when it's concluded, the investigation is concluded, we must identify these lessons learned and also areas for improvement to prevent future issues. Very important. And this also comes back to the culture, because if there's no process improvement in the investigation and all that, then we need to then ask ourselves, why are we doing it? Other than getting to know what went wrong, then communicate outcomes. I believe that when we do these things, we resolve the issues effectively and also strengthen our own corporate culture, which is very important, because again, the culture is what the organization lives by. It's what's breathing and living. And if we don't do it well, there's a problem. So I believe this would help us.
Thank you, Ahoy. Thank you. Thank you. That's a very, very important point. Non-retaliatory policy. I think this is something that organizations must pay very strong attention to, and communicating policies. We find out when investigators go on the field, like us, and you are trying to get evidence of what is the policy, the stance of governance or stance of leadership, you find that there's a policy somewhere, maybe still in draft, but then the challenge is it's not being communicated. So how do we then ensure that these things, but this is good. Thank you. Abayomi, now you're doing the investigation, and William had mentioned a couple of points, and Ehoy also reemphasized one of them, which is starting the investigation promptly. Now, what are some of the key principles in gathering evidence, and gathering evidence, specifically interviews of employees or stakeholders? What are some of the key principles that one must pay attention to in terms of the interview techniques?
All right, I think it's very important to mention, maybe before I dive into the response to your question, I think that for me it is quite exciting to be on the other side of the table, considering that I have been there for quite some time. I've been the moderator for this kind of session, and I've been on the other side of the table, having to speak to matters relating to interviewing. If you are conducting what we call investigative interviewing. So when we talk about investigation, we're talking about a fact-finding activity that is meant to be completed under a timeline. And you can't conduct investigation without gathering evidence. And one of the means through which you gather evidence, aside from requesting for policies, document from your stakeholders, or what exists in the organization's portal in terms of their repository where the documents are kept, is for you to speak with relevant stakeholders. And what makes a successful interview session, when Tasty was speaking much earlier, she was talking about planning and planning and planning your investigation. So we can't overemphasize the importance of planning. And when it comes to interviewing, you know, you want to take planning into consideration. But before I even talk about the planning, so there's what we call the peace model. There's a peace model, and this model was developed in Britain by the British police, and it's a technique for conducting what we call investigative interviewing, such that and the word peace itself is a mnemonic, and with peace speaking to with the first letter P speaking to planning and prepare. So as an investigator, you want to get on an investigation, it is very essential that you plan the interview. And part of the planning of the interview, you want to call out, okay, what is the purpose of this interview? And that will mirror the allegation. When Cynthia was speaking earlier, I was talking about the terms of reference, the allegation. So the question now is, okay, when you're planning, what's the purpose of the interview? Who are the parties to be interviewed? You know, it's very important to identify the relevant stakeholders you want to interview, you know, and where do you want to conduct the interview? Is it going to be a virtual interview? Is it going to be a physical interview? And, you know, in terms of your note taking, how do you want to record the interview? Do you want to, you know, in terms of note taking, do you want to record the interview and all whatnot? So you need to take planning into consideration. You need to prepare thoroughly. You need to do your background work, you know, before you get on the interview with whether the suspect, a witness, or a process owner. So in the peace model, that's P meaning PEACE. So the first P is planning and prepare. Then this next one is E, which is engage and explain. So William Jackson was speaking earlier. You know, you want to speak with a suspect, and you don't want to come across as being intimidating. You want to, I've got the person may just be wondering, what is this interview all about? Why am I brought to the interview table? And you know, you just want to explain, and you want to calm the nerves of the suspect, or probably of a witness, of a process owner, just to ensure that they understand the basis for the interview, and just give it a like overview. You know, just ensure that you build rapport on the interview. So part of building rapport on the interview is to ensure that, you know, it helps you to disable any form of resistance that a suspect might want to exhibit. So you want to interview a suspect and the person is pushing back, he doesn't want to answer your question. But when you're able to establish rapport with the suspect or with a witness, it helps to disable any kind of resistance the person might want to put forward. So you need to engage, you need to explain. Then the next A is having to talk about accounts, and this is where you give your interviewee, if you want to call it interviewee or a suspect or a witness, the opportunity to give like a blow-by-blow account of what you are interviewing them on. And in giving that blow-by-blow account, you want to ask the right question. So one of the techniques of interview is that you want to use a combination of what we call open-ended question and closed-ended question. And you want to avoid leading questions. You want to ask open-ended questions that will give your interviewee the opportunity to provide a clear account of what has transpired, or from where they see the whole situation, or their own point of view with respect to the question you are putting forward to them. So ask open-ended question. In some cases, ask closed-ended question, but avoid leading questions, because it might be leading them on the path of deception. For instance, if you ask a suspect, okay, why did you pocket that $5,000 from the vault? As opposed to asking the question that, okay, when you arrive at the vault, what happened? Because when you ask open-ended question, it helps you also to process the information being provided by your interviewee. And you as an interviewer, as a forensic interviewer, your work is to is to gather those information, being able to piece the information together and get to the bottom of the matter. So, of course, we want to establish what's the root cause of this allegation, what has led to this, what has transpired to this. So you are connecting all the dots. So that's what A represents. Then the C is closure. So what closure does is to help you to have a mutual understanding with your interviewee. And the E is talking about evaluation. So you need to evaluate the outcome of the interview. Do you need to have additional interview? Is the outcome of the interview successful? So at the end of it, at the end of the day, all of this put together helps you to have an effective interview. So you can never emphasize the importance of planning, importance of engaging appropriately, using the right sort of questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Abami. That's very thoughtful. The peace model, the very important model that as investigators we must pay attention to. What I will do very quickly there's a question that I noted for William. William, somebody had asked a question in the chat box, and the question says, how do you carry, or how can we carry out proactive forensics without actually losing the trust of employees?
I think there are several ways to do it. And again, it's going to really value on the structure of your company and how you do forensics. For ourselves, if we're going to talk about electronic forensics, our data process approvals allow us to extract that data without the employee even knowing. So we extract the data, we process the data, we look for whatever evidence that we need. If you're talking about from a document standpoint, our processes allow us to extract all of the information we need, compile it, go through it, and the employee is normally totally unaware that we are pulling this data. So very much from a very surveillance perspective, we're able to do that. If your processes don't allow you to do that, or you have to refocus how you do, then you have to be open and honest. You have to understand, let the individual know, we received the concern, we're going through this documentation in order to vet out the concern. I would not mislead anyone to say you're the subject, you're not the subject, because even though William is alleged to be the subject, you don't really know that until you've gone through the evidential trail. So let them know that you're compiling this information in order to go through, identify, and then we'll circle back to you. Now, because you made that initial contact with that person, then you need to have periodic checkpoints with them. If it's every 2 weeks, whatever your company elects for you, you need to touch in, hey, we're still going through the documents, just want to let you know, so far we have not completed it. Because you give that gap in there to where there's no communication, then that particular staff that you've retrieved all these documents from are now thinking that, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Stress level goes up, emotional goes up, and now we're talking about a care model. So my philosophy is that if you have to go to them, you go to them very straightforward, very honestly, because that helps to maintain your integrity.
Thank you, William. I think one key word, integrity. As investigators, we must be mindful of this. Now, we're going to take a quick pause. Audience, participants, please grab your phones, grab your mouse. We want to take a short poll. We want to hear directly from you, please. The poll will be coming on the screen now, just right about now. And so we want you to please respond to this question. It will be good to hear from you as well. What is the best way to prevent retaliation against employees who report any form of misconduct? Please respond. The options are on the screen as well. A single choice, just pick one. Let's know what your views are. Thank you. Okay, do we have all the responses in now? What is the best way to prevent retaliation against employees who report any form of misconduct? Don't worry, you don't need to think too much. Just select one. Just what's your view about it? Okay. We're going to bring down the poll now. Thank you. Do we have responses? What do we have? 75% of the respondents believe that we need to implement robust anti-retaliation policies, as well as maintain confidentiality and anonymity throughout the investigation process. 22% believe developing a whistleblowing policy is the best way, whilst 2% also consider relieving the accused person of his duties to prevent any form of retaliation, while 1% feels rewarding employees who report fraud and misconduct. All right. Thank you very much, participants. So quickly, I want to ask Stacy a question. What are the potential ethical dilemmas that may arise during an investigation? Stacy.
Thanks, Babajide. Well, as you all know, there are several different types of dilemmas that can surface during an investigation, which should give you a reason to pause and consider any ethical issues or conflicts. And they take various forms. Some of these dilemmas could be how you can operate and maneuver under local data privacy laws, for example. There are various limitations on the way that you can collect, store, and use personal data, and these protections can vary greatly from one jurisdiction to another. So it's important to understand what the relevant data protection laws are and how this might impact your ability to process and use different forms of evidence, and then therefore go back to your investigation plan to see how, if at all, that impacts your ability to conduct certain steps. There are also big differences under employment and HR laws regarding the type of information that can be collected and used, which could be key to how you're able to go about conducting a workplace misconduct or business integrity matter. It could be because information doesn't exist. It was never allowed to be collected or maintained under local law to begin with. Or it could be that local labor laws allowed you to obtain this, but actually you can't use it for certain purposes. So again, that along with the data privacy point, it's always just prudent to map out the different jurisdictions involved in an investigation and make sure you're fully aware of all sort of local customs and requirements that may differ from geography to geography. I think personal conflicts as well, aside from regulatory conflicts, but personal conflicts are something we should always be alive to, because there will be times during investigation where you might need to recuse yourself or others from conducting an investigation, given either a personal or professional connection that may impair your objectivity or independence on a matter. And as William mentioned earlier, what if you're asked to investigate allegations against someone who's in charge of your bonus or promotion prospects? Can you really be fair and impartial in that situation? So be alive to anything that could impact your ability to analyze the matter in a fair and impartial way. And if something does arise where you think it could impact your objectivity, do consult in a timely way if you have those concerns. I think there are some bits around acting with utmost professionalism and integrity, and to ensure that you treat people with respect and empathy throughout, because otherwise that can also create a range of different ethical dilemmas. And this includes things such as making sure you've obtained informed consent and you're transparent with the individuals you're dealing with wherever possible, right? As we know, there are certain geographies where you cannot record interviews full stop, or maybe you can, but you need express consent to do so. So again, be alive to those situations to ensure you're not creating any ethical dilemmas in the investigative steps that you take. I think on that point, it also includes doing whatever you can to protect the individual's privacy. And that could come about by limiting access to personal data so that you're ensuring that only individuals directly involved in the investigation have access to sensitive personal data, and that appropriate kind of data access and IT controls are in place, both in relation to creation and maintenance and also deletion of the data. And that also includes anonymizing and using pseudonyms in your data wherever possible. I think we know oftentimes when you're looking into things where it could be really obvious who a reporter or potential victim could be, such as people who work in very small teams or where there's only a handful of people that would have been privy to the information that's been reported. So, ensure to take appropriate steps to protect, the individuals involved and to minimize concerns they may have around potential acts of retaliation.
Thank you, Stacey. Very helpful. Yeah. Thank you. That's important for us as investigators. Even though we have the power to be able to question people or interview people, we must learn to treat people with respect. And one key point is it's not all investigations that you must undertake. When there are times for you to recuse because of personal conflict, it's advisable that you do so. Prof. Antonio, how can investigators balance the pursuit of truth with protecting individuals and organizations that they work with?
Yeah, look, I mean, on the pursuit of truth, if you look at the keywords that have come out of the responses from the panelists today: privacy, confidentiality, fairness, transparency, impartiality, all of that is critical as we move towards creating that balance of the pursuit of truth. And I guess the old adage, let justice be done, though the heavens fall, still rings true, right? But the reality, and I think of someone I knew who's a year ago lost his life as a result of this quest for the pursuit of truth and ensuring that justice is done though the heavens fall, is that it comes at a cost. We can't be blind to that fact. We've seen in South Africa investigators, evidence leaders, witnesses lose their lives for doing what is right. But that's not going to stop us from continuing to pursue the truth. And so it becomes important then to ensure that we are thorough, we are fact-based. And something Stacey just spoke about a minute ago is that it's not about emotions or how we relate to those that we're investigating, right? It's about ensuring that when there is that personal conflict, we make sure that we can preserve and protect the truth by perhaps, well, not perhaps, but actually moving it on to someone else that's not conflicted. It may mean that when we're doing an internal investigation and these independence risks are heightened, we need to outsource that investigation. So this is something that is at the heart of what we do. It's about getting to the fact and the truth, and therefore I think we must be mindful of those keywords that have come up throughout the conversation today. Thanks.
Many thanks, Antonio. Many thanks. And pursuit of truth, please, if you need to outsource, please outsource so as to balance the pursuit of truth. Thank you. I'll go to Ahoy now. Ahoy, regarding consequence management, how do you think HR professionals must maintain a neutral stance during and after investigations? Very quickly, please.
Okay, so for HR professionals, they must remember that it's their job and therefore must be very objective at all times. Now, being objective might not come very easily, but with training and with understanding your role, so therefore there must be clear policies and procedures that shows the clear standardized investigation processes, right? What should come next and all that. What happens with that is it reduces subjective decision making. So you're not saying, oh, I think, no, they're laid down procedures and policies already. Then there must be bias awareness training. So there's something Stacey has said, to be able to be very professional, you must be trained, right, as a HR professional. And this must be regular so that you can recognize when you're being biased or you can even mitigate it. And when you feel, oh, I can't do this, then speak up and say, okay, there's a conflict of interest here, or because I know the person. So then it also helps when there's separate roles. So the investigator is different from the decision making. So what this helps us to do is that it's evaluated very objectively. The investigator must not be the decision, the person making the decision. Very important that we also have that. Then documentation is key. When you document, you from start to finish, every person sees, people that are involved in the investigation knows that this is what has happened, this is what's going to happen. So it's not all in your head as the HR person. Then confidentiality comes up again and again. Then in an instance where it's a very sensitive case, please outsource it. So that's why you can involve a Deloitte forensic team to say, please, use a third-party investigator, right, to come. So when we do all this, it also helps us as HR professionals to be neutral, because again, we're humans and it's easy for us to be subjective.
Thank you, Ahoy. Thank you. Just to mention again, to all our participants, thank you so much for joining us. Please, if there's any question you have, even if you're not able to address, please be assured that when we are sending the feedback or the communique at the end of this session, we would ensure to collate all of these questions and with responses. Okay, quickly, Abami, what measures do we need to take to protect confidentiality? Yehoe just mentioned a couple, but it would be good to hear from you as well as an investigator. Very quickly.
All right. All right, thank you so much. So, as we've mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, confidentiality on an investigation cannot be overemphasized. So because you don't want to conduct an investigation and there is a leakage of information to unauthorized parties or stakeholders. So, and for you to ensure confidentiality of the documents gathered in an investigation or the investigation process itself, number one is that you want to ensure effective communication protocol, which boils down to we should have what information and which should be on a need to know basis. So what are the stakeholders that should be informed about an allegation? What are the channels of communicating those allegations? And in terms of even as in terms of progressing the investigation activity, so what are the people that should be updated on the investigation? So that has to be set at the beginning of the investigation. So that is number one. So effective communication protocol. Number two is that for the investigation team and other stakeholders that are attached to the investigation, you want to ensure that they are committed to a non-disclosure agreement. And what that does is to put the responsibility of confidentiality on their shoulders. We want to ensure that everybody that is part of the investigation team, they uphold utmost confidentiality by ensuring that they sign off on the non-disclosure documents. Another point that is also very important is that so if there are conflicts of interest matters, we want to ensure that if people that are conflicted, just like Stacey mentioned earlier, so if there's a case of conflict of interest and someone on the team is conflicted, we want to ensure that those persons declare and they get to recruit themselves from that investigation process. Then maybe just one more point to mention in terms of confidentiality is that we want to ensure that the data gathered on an investigation is secured, is placed on a secured platform. And you can on that platform you can embed what we call multi-factor authentication, such that documents are not doesn't filter into unauthorized ends. And maybe one more point will be that as you progress on the investigation, there might be certain members of the investigation team that might need to share certain information. So we also want to ensure what we call supervisory review of what goes out. So how sensitive is that information? Should that information go out? And that is why you have a team lead, you have a senior resource that is overseeing the investigation, ensuring that the right level of communication is going to the right level of stakeholders. So those are some of the key pointers to take into consideration if we are to secure the confidentiality of the investigation and even of the data gathered, so that data does not go into the wrong hands. Thank you.
All right, great. Well done, Yomi. Well done. Nice one. So it's important to have stakeholders, internal and external stakeholders that must be managed when dealing with confidentiality. Santia, how then can investigative teams be structured and managed for better optimum results?
Babajid, the nature and the size of the team depend on the allegation that you're investigating. So basically, we usually see an investigation engagement as a project. If you want a project to succeed, you put the resources in place to meet your target. So for this question, I will say that the first thing will be to build a team, a multidisciplinary team based on the nature of the allegation to be investigated. So usually you can have an OSINT specialist for social media search and so on, data scientists, data analysts, HR specialists, compliance specialists, and so on, depending on the nature of the allegation to be investigated. The second thing, as I was saying, an investigation is a project itself. So you should define a clear role for each person involved in the investigation. So we should define a clear role for each staff involved in the investigation and the responsibilities. And on top of that, you should have a kind of you should have a lead investigator, a lead investigator. As Aina was saying, at each level of communication, at each level of the investigation, we need to communicate either with the client staff or the senior management and so on. So we should have a lead investigator to coordinate all the effort of the team and ensure a proper communication to avoid data breach and so on and so on.
All
And
right. Okay, please go
yeah.
ahead, Santia.
No, I think it's almost all. So what we should keep in mind is that the size, the nature of the team depend on the nature of the allegation to be investigated. And at the end of the day, we should have one person in charge of the investigation, as a lead investigator. The last one, the last one, Wajide, is the overseeing of the investigation engagement. Usually what we used to do, as I was saying, it's a project in itself. So what we used to do when conducting an investigation and when we are leading specifically the investigation, we used to put in place a kind of sprint. A sprint is a meeting among ourselves, among the investigation team, a 50-minute sprint every day to discuss the challenges that the team are facing, the initial findings, and how we should handle the remaining works. So it's very important to manage an engagement, an investigation engagement as a project in full. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Santia. So it's right about time for us to start winding the entire process. And what I would then request, William, I'm going to ask you, as part of your final takeaway, 2 questions, 2 in 1. What type of qualifications beside ACFE, LLB do hiring managers like yourself look for? And how do you deal with cases involving senior management? So you have 30 seconds and your time starts now. Thank you.
30 seconds. Number one, what I look for in hiring is not only just the ACFE and those things. I look for experience in interviewing, how a person can carry themselves, their report writing skill sets, and again, their ability to think strategically and understand a particular area of the business and how to find out. Number 2, how do you handle senior managers? Very easily. We interview them just like anybody else. We don't show any difference in that. I will allow my lower grade staff to interview a senior leader. If they're not comfortable, I will sit in the room with them to build that skill set and capacity so that they feel comfortable doing it. But I trust them to interview a senior leader no different than myself. The only difference that we do is that the stakeholder may not be internal, meaning sitting in Nigeria, there may be someone sitting in London, one of the other areas, but we treat a senior leader no differently than we treat anyone else.
You.
Was that with 30 seconds?
I think you did a good job. Thank you, William. So I'm then going to call on Ehoy. Final words, 30 seconds.
Wow. So I'll try to make 30 seconds. Investigation is very key. However, when it's being done, we must take into cognizance the culture and the people which make the culture. So therefore, it must be prompt. It must be done on time. The HR professionals must be trained on bias management, understanding the legal laws of the land, and reflect the policies of the organizations to the legal laws of the land, right? Because the organization is a mirror of the society. So very key, investigations must be done promptly, must be done objectively, fairness must be taken into cognizance, and where there's going to be bias, then I'll source it to a third party. Thank you.
Thank you, Ehoy. Excellent. So I will then call on Abayomi. 30 seconds, your time starts now. Key takeaway.
All right, thank you so much, Jide. So on the final note, it is very, very important to understand that workplace investigation is unlikely to go away due to the persistence of internal and external threats to a business. So in view of that, what enterprises should they are meant to do is to strengthen the controls to identify, prevent, and dictate any form of anomalies that might undermine the reputation of the organization and that might erode the interest of stakeholders of the business. Yeah, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Abayomi. Let me then call on Stacy. Stacy, quickly.
Sorry, just had to get off mute there. I think one of my biggest takeaways is something we haven't mentioned yet, actually, in much detail, and it's the importance of communication, right? I mean, we've spoken a lot about the plumbing of what makes a good investigation, but actually, oftentimes your overall success depends on that regular, ongoing flow of communications between those conducting the investigation and those overseeing the investigation, as well as that range of different stakeholders that you may have to navigate across the company, right? And that include anyone from managers to senior leaders to the reporter to victims to witnesses and so on. It could also include relevant external stakeholders, because oftentimes we're dealing with regulatory bodies, we might be working with external counsel, and there are times, given the nature of the issue at hand, there might have to be updates to the general public as well. So I'd say don't underestimate the importance of putting together a communications plan and strategy at the outset of the investigation, including that all-important RACI matrix, right, of who needs to know what and when, and who needs to be consulted at what degree, and to keep that going throughout to help maintain your credibility and to help keep you on schedule when conducting the investigation as well.
Thank you, Stacy. Santia, let's have it from you. 30 seconds.
Yeah. As you have heard, investigation is very complex and sensitive issue. So please outsource all your investigation to Deloitte team. Thank you.
Excellent. I agree. The last but not the least, the Africa Head of Forensic, Antonio. Let's have it from you.
Thank you, Babajide. My thoughts are occupational fraud and abuse continues to evolve. Sessions like this are important to ensure that we as practitioners continue to share information and we empower ourselves and each other the same way that criminals, they're hard at work, they're learning, they're sharing the scheme. So we have to share. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. At this point in time, I'd like to thank all our participants, all our panelists, but that's not my role to do. I've been Babajide Oklola, and it's indeed been a pleasure moderating this session. Until we call on you again, our esteemed guest, this has been Deloitte Forensic. I dare say that we are number one, and about us, we have what we call the facts. We are able to provide services to clients with respect to due diligence, e-discovery, digital forensic, anti-bribery and corruption investigations, even support with training. Please, at any point in time, do not hesitate to reach out to us. Indeed, it has been a pleasure having you. And at this point in time, I want to call on my wonderful colleague, also an associate director within the West Africa practice, Asaf Watse Abe. Asaf, over to you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. We want to extend heartfelt thanks to everyone who joined us for this engaging session. We truly appreciate your active participation and your attention. Here at Deloitte Forensic, we are dedicated to helping businesses prevent disruptions through effective investigations. And this event has underscored our commitment to support organizations in improving their investigative practices. So a big thank you to our keynote speaker, William Jackson III, for sharing his invaluable expertise with us. We are grateful to our panelists, Professor Antonio Poi, Santia Oka, Stacy Toda-Feldman, Ahoy Amioki, and Abayomi Aina for their insightful contributions. We also want to express our gratitude to the organizers and all participants for making this colloquium a success. It's our hope that what we have learned and reminded ourselves of today will help us build more resilient organizations. Once again, thank you for being a part of this event and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.